The hunting knife hit the rough-hewn table with enough force to stick upright in the wood, and every man in the Iron Peak mining camp cookhouse went silent. Vola Ironblood stood in the doorway with the firelight behind her and the cold mountain dark at her back, and she did not look like someone asking permission to enter. She was tall for an orc woman, broad across the shoulders, with forest-green skin that caught the lantern light like polished malachite. Her dark hair was pulled back in a braid thick as a man's wrist, threaded through with copper rings that clinked softly when she moved. She wore fitted leather traveling clothes, dark brown and well-worn, a bodice laced tight from hip to collarbone over a close-cut long-sleeved undershirt the color of storm clouds, form-fitting enough that no man in the room had any trouble understanding exactly how she was built. Her tusks were short and elegant, curving up from the corners of a full mouth that was currently set in the kind of expression that promised significant problems for anyone who tested her patience. The knife in the table was not hers. She had thrown it there after catching it from the hand of a man who had tried to use it on her outside. That man was currently sitting in the mud 30 feet from the cookhouse door, reconsidering his life choices. "Thomas Dawson," she said. Her voice was low and measured, like a river that knew how deep it ran. "I am told he sleeps here." Nobody answered immediately. 12 miners, 3 loggers, a cook, and the camp's general foreman all found something fascinating to look at that was not the orc woman filling the doorway. Vola's dark eyes moved slowly around the room with the patience of someone who had learned that men who did not answer quickly were usually men who were afraid, and men who were afraid almost always came around eventually. "He does," said the cook at last, a broad woman named Petra who had never been impressed by much of anything and was not about to start. She jerked her chin toward the back wall. "Bunk room, 3rd cot from the left. Though I'll warn you, he plays until the 2nd hour past midnight most nights, and he sleeps like a man who has made peace with the possibility of never waking up." Vola pulled her knife free from the table, wiped the point on her thigh, and sheathed it without ceremony. "Thank you," she said, and she walked through the cookhouse without another word. The bunk room was dark except for a single low-burning candle left in a tin holder on a shelf above the door. It smelled like sawdust, pine resin, boot leather, and the particular exhausted funk of men who work hard in high-altitude cold. 7 occupied cots lined the walls. 6 of them held sleeping miners whose snores formed a rough, discordant orchestra. The 7th, 3rd from the left on the south wall, held a man curled on his side with his back to the room, his dark hair falling over his face, one arm stretched out over the edge of the cot, where his loot case rested on the floor beside it like a trusted companion. Vola stood at the foot of the cot for a long moment and looked at Thomas Dawson. She had been told about him by her cousin Braga, who had passed through Iron Peak 3 months before on a trade run. Braga had described him as a human string player with a smart mouth and honest eyes who tells stories that make you feel like the world is larger than it was before you heard them. Braga had also said, in the blunt and practical way of orc women discussing matters of the heart, that Vola should consider him, because he was the kind of man who looked at things and actually saw them, which was rarer than most people understood. Vola had come to see for herself. That was the practical side of it. The other side, the side she did not examine too closely, was that she had been alone for 5 years since her clan had fractured over a succession dispute, and she was 31 years old, and there was a specific hollow feeling that had taken up residence behind her sternum that nothing she had tried had managed to fill. She set down the offering on the shelf beside his cot. It was a cloth-wrapped bundle tied with green cord, the first courtship offering in the Ironblood clan tradition, dried heartroot, a carved token of the giver's house sigil, and a small amount of iron dust wrapped in waxed cloth, which together meant I have come to you in good faith, and I ask you to consider me. It was not a demand. It was a declaration of interest, offered with dignity and left to the recipient to answer as they chose. Thomas Dawson slept through it. He did not stir. His chest rose and fell with the deep, absolutely committed rhythm of a man who was categorically unavailable to the waking world. Vola looked at him for another moment. The candlelight played across the line of his jaw, the loose set of his shoulders, the way his fingers curled slightly even in sleep, like he was thinking about chord shapes. She noted that his boots were patched at both heels and his coat, hanging from a peg above the cot, had a tear along the left shoulder mended with thread that did not quite match. She did not wake him. She walked back through the cookhouse, past Petra who watched her with sharp, curious eyes, past the miners who were pretending very hard not to stare, and out into the mountain night. She made camp half a mile up the slope in a stand of black pine, started a careful fire, and thought about what she was doing. The Ironblood clan had been in pieces for 5 years. Her uncle Rogan had contested her mother's decision to align with the Greyville Orcs to the north, had challenged the arrangement, and when he lost the political argument he had done something worse. He had taken the clan's treaty iron, the ceremonial bar of iron that represented the Ironblood line's right to conduct trade and diplomacy, and he had offered it to the Stonecrag clan as a bond price. A bond price meant debt. It meant that until the iron was returned or the debt paid, the Ironblood name was compromised, and Vola's ability to make any arrangement of her own, any courtship, any alliance, was technically encumbered. The complication was significant. She could not formally court anyone while the treaty iron sat in Stonecrag hands. If she attempted a traditional binding and her uncle challenged it, the arrangement could be voided, and the person she had bonded with could be left exposed to clan politics that were genuinely dangerous. But the tradition did allow for something else. It allowed for an offered courtship that was freely accepted by the recipient without ceremony, without clan sanction, conducted in secret long enough for the bond to become real. A bond strong enough, one that the recipient chose with full knowledge of the risk, could not be voided by any uncle. The tradition called this path the iron route, the kind of connection that grew too deep to pull out before anyone could stop it. Vola was not naive about the risks. She was not naive about much. But she had also looked at the face of Thomas Dawson sleeping on that bunk, and she had felt something move in her chest like a key turning in a lock she had forgotten was there. She intended to be practical about this. She also intended to try again. The morning broke cold and bright over the Iron Peak Range, the kind of early autumn morning that made every breath feel like drinking cold water. The logging camp was already alive by the time the sun cleared the eastern peaks. Axes ringing, timber rolling, the great 6-horse draft teams hauling loads down the mountain road, the smell of wood smoke and pine, and the constant fine powder of sawdust hanging in the crisp air. Thomas Dawson was sitting on a log outside the cookhouse, with a bowl of Petra's porridge balanced on one knee and his lute across his other knee, picking something quiet and unresolved with the distracted half-attention of a musician working out a problem in the background of breakfast. He was 28 years old, lean and trail-hardened, with the kind of face that was not classically handsome but was deeply interesting to look at. Dark eyes under heavy brows, a wide mouth, a nose that had been broken once and healed slightly crooked. He had a habit of tilting his head when he listened to something, like he was trying to find the exact angle at which he could hear it most clearly. He had found the bundle on the shelf when he woke. He had turned it over in his hands for a long time, recognizing it for what it was. He had been in enough orc-adjacent settlements in his years of wandering to know a courtship token when he saw one. The heartroot, the carved sigil of a tusk enclosed in a circle of iron which was the Ironblood mark, the iron dust. He had sat on his bunk with the bundle in his lap and tried to figure out who might have left it there and come up with nothing useful. He was thinking about it still when he heard the sound of his own name, and he looked up. Vola Ironblood was standing at the edge of the clearing, looking at him with the direct and unhurried attention of someone who had made a decision and was comfortable with it. Thomas stopped picking. He looked at her. He looked at her quite thoroughly, in the way he looked at things he found genuinely interesting, and she watched him do it without shifting or crossing her arms or performing discomfort. Her copper hair rings caught the morning light. Her leather bodice was weathered in the way of gear that had done real work over real years. She stood with her weight balanced on both feet, hands loose at her sides, and she looked like a woman who could be an earthquake if she chose to be. "Good morning," said Thomas. "Good morning," said Vola. "I left you something last night." Thomas looked down at the bundle on the log beside him, which he had carried out without really thinking about it. "I gathered," he said. "I was asleep." "I know, you were asleep in a very committed way." "I play late," he said. "I am told it is both my most endearing quality and my most significant flaw. That seems like a complicated thing to be told. I travel in complicated circles." There was a beat of quiet between them, not awkward, just the particular silence of two people deciding what kind of conversation they are going to have. "I am Vola Ironblood," she said. "My cousin Braga passed through here 3 months ago. She spoke of you." Thomas turned the lute upright and rested his chin on the neck of it, thinking. Braga, orc woman, northern accent, traded iron goods for dried fish and coffee. That is Braga. She sat in on my show for 2 nights and then told me my third act resolution was emotionally dishonest. She was probably right, Thomas laughed. It was a good laugh, sudden and unguarded, the kind that came from genuine amusement rather than performance. "She was absolutely right," he said. "What did she tell you about me?" "That you were worth considering." He looked at her for a moment with those dark, tilted eyes. "And you came all the way up an Iron Peak logging road to do that?" "To consider me. I came to see for myself. I preferred to form my own opinion." "And what opinion have you formed?" he asked, and there was nothing mocking in it. He asked it the way he would have asked about weather or road conditions, because he genuinely wanted to know. Vola looked at him. She looked at the patched boots and the crooked nose and the lute held against him like a second spine. She looked at the way he had asked his question with curiosity instead of vanity, without assuming a particular answer. "I have not finished forming it yet," she said. "That is why I left the offering." Thomas picked up the bundle and weighed it in his hand. "I know what this is," he said. "I want you to know that I know, because I do not think it would be respectful to pretend I don't." Vola's posture did not change, but something in her eyes sharpened slightly, like a lens focusing. "And knowing what it is," she asked. "I am not entirely sure what to do with it," he said honestly. "I am a wandering musician at a logging camp in the mountains. I have approximately 1 set of clothes, a borrowed bunk, and a contract to play here through the end of the timber season. I am not what anyone would call a strong prospect." "I have not asked you to be a prospect," Vola said. "I have asked you to consider me. Those are different things." Thomas turned the bundle over once more and set it carefully back on the log. "You are right," he said. "They are different things." He picked up his bowl of porridge again, looked at it, looked back at her. "Have you eaten?" "Not yet. Petra makes a good porridge. It sounds like a modest recommendation, but up here in the mountains it is actually extremely high praise." For the first time, Vola almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. The corner of her mouth moved in a direction that was not entirely neutral. "I would not mind some porridge," she said. She sat on the log beside him, not touching, just close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating off her. And Petra brought out a second bowl without being asked, which said everything about Petra that needed to be said. They ate their breakfast in the mountain morning and talked about small things, the road conditions coming up from the valley, the weather patterns in the high pass, a fire that had taken out a section of trail 3 weeks before. Thomas asked questions and listened to the answers with his full attention, that slight head tilt, and Vola found herself answering more completely than she had intended, telling him not just the facts of her journey, but the texture of it, the way the old-growth forest had smelled before the rain, the specific quality of the light through the smoke of the trail fire. He asked what had brought her to the mountains. She told him the true answer, or enough of it, that she had business in the region and had wanted to come north before the passes closed for winter. She did not tell him about the treaty iron. Not yet. That was a conversation that required more than porridge and a first meeting. But she noted that he had asked, and that he had listened to what she said instead of to what he expected her to say, and she catalogued this alongside the other things she was learning about Thomas Dawson. By the end of the week, she had learned considerably more. Thomas Dawson played in the cookhouse every evening after the supper hour, when the miners and loggers who had enough energy left after a day of hard work at altitude gathered to drink and tell lies about themselves. He played old road songs and mountain ballads, and occasionally pieces that were clearly his own, and he told stories in between, long rambling narratives that somehow always arrived at a point that surprised you even when you thought you had seen it coming. He had a particular gift for making the men and women who worked at the camp feel, for an hour, like they were the heroes of something larger than a timber contract. And Thomas himself did not seem to understand that this was an unusual and valuable thing, which made it more effective rather than less. Vola came to the cookhouse on the second evening, and the third, and by the fourth the other workers had stopped registering her presence as anything remarkable, which was itself remarkable given that she was an orc woman in a mostly human camp, in a region where the two did not always mix easily. But something about the way she sat and watched Thomas without any self-consciousness about being watched in return, and something about the way Thomas talked to her before and after with the same easy directness he used with everyone, had the effect of making the question of what she was doing there feel already answered. She found him on the fifth evening before his show, alone at the far end of the cookhouse with his lute, working through something new with the focused quiet of a craftsman at a bench. "You are building something," she said. He did not look up, but he smiled. "I am trying to. Something is not sitting right in the second section. The melody is fighting the bass line." "Play it for me." He played it. It was a fragment, rough and unresolved, but even rough it had that quality of his, that sense of being oriented toward something true. He played it twice through and frowned. "The third note in the second phrase," Vola said. "It is pulling down when the melody is trying to rise. They want the same space." Thomas looked up at her. "You know music. My mother sang. All of my family sang. We did not have musicians in the modern sense, but music was not a mystery to us." He played the section again, adjusting the third note, and the phrase opened up like a room gaining a window. "There," Vola said. Thomas sat with the instrument for a moment, running the phrase several more times with clear satisfaction. "You have a good ear," he said. "I have a good ear for when something wants to be something else," she said. "It is useful in more situations than music." He set the lute across his knees and looked at her with that full, turned attention. "I found your second offering this morning," he said. Vola met his eyes without blinking. "I know. I also slept through the leaving of it. I know that too." He had woken to find a second bundle on the shelf, tied with the same green cord, containing this time a piece of carved leather tooled with a mountain and a path, the traditional second offering, which meant I am not asking you to decide yet. I am asking you to see that I am still here. You left it anyway, he said, even knowing I was asleep. The custom does not require a witness, Vola said. The offering is made regardless. Whether you receive it in the moment of leaving is not the point. The point is that it was left. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Why me, he asked. It was not a self-deprecating question, not fishing for reassurance. It was an honest inquiry, the kind he aimed at everything that interested him. Vola considered the answer. She had given considerable thought to how much to tell him, and had decided that honesty was the approach most likely to work, not because she was naively optimistic about it, but because she had watched him for 5 days and understood that he was someone who responded well to truth and badly to performance. Because Braga is rarely wrong about people, she said. And because what I have seen since I came here confirms what she said. You see what is in front of you. You do not decide what it should be before you look at it. I have found that to be a rarer thing than it has any right to be. That is a practical answer, Thomas said. I am a practical woman. And the impractical answer, Vola paused. The cookhouse was still largely empty around them, the prep sounds of supper coming from behind the kitchen partition, the low wind moving against the windows, the camp outside settling into its evening routine. "The impractical answer," she said slowly, "is that when I walked into the bunk room and saw you sleeping, I felt something that I recognized. And I have felt it every time I have sat beside you this week. It is inconvenient and it does not fit neatly into a practical plan, but I am a woman who believes in being honest about inconvenient things." Thomas did not look away. He did not rush to fill the space after she finished. He sat with what she had said the way he sat with a new piece of music, turning it over, hearing all the notes. "There is something you are not telling me," he said at last, "about your situation, about why you are really here." Vola looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said. "Will you tell me?" "Not tonight. Tonight there are things I would rather you just enjoy if you are willing." He picked up the lute again and played the corrected phrase once more, and it was exactly right, exactly what it wanted to be. "Then enjoy them I will," he said. The autumn deepened around Iron Peak, and the rhythm of the camp shifted. The days shortened and the temperature dropped hard in the evenings, and the loggers worked with a particular urgency that comes from knowing the snows would make the mountain roads impassable by the turn of the season. Thomas's evenings in the cookhouse became the fixed point of the camp's social gravity, and Vola became part of them in the way that certain presences become inevitable. You only noticed them when they were absent. She had taken a position at the camp in the meantime, hired on as a trail warden, which meant she scouted the logging roads for hazards, managed the watch rotation against the occasional predator trouble that came with working in old-growth mountain forest, and handled the more physically demanding security issues that arose. The camp foreman, a leathery veteran named Oswald, had hired her with the practical mercenary logic of a man who had watched her put the knife-throwing drunk on his back and understood that this was a capability worth paying for. Thomas watched her work with the same attentiveness he gave everything else worth watching. He saw her pull a spooked draft horse back from the edge of a ravine with one hand and a very calm voice. He saw her track a mountain cat through 3 miles of brushwood and discourage it from the camp perimeter without killing it. Because, as she explained to him afterward, mountain cats had their own reasons for the things they did, and those reasons rarely included malice. He saw her mediate a dispute between 2 loggers whose long-running grievance had finally tipped into actual violence, stepping between them with the absolute physical authority of a woman who could drop either of them without effort, and the remarkable social restraint of someone who preferred not to. And he played in the evenings, and she sat in the cookhouse, and they talked afterward when the others had gone to their bunks. The talking was what he had not expected, not the quality of her mind, which he had assessed quickly and correctly in the first week, but the texture of the conversations themselves, the way they moved through subjects and came back to things, and built on what had been said before. She had traveled widely before the clan split had constrained her, had been to the southern markets and the eastern seaports and the high orc settlements in the northern mountains, and she talked about what she had seen with the specific, honest precision of someone who had looked at things and not merely traveled past them. He told her stories. Not the polished ones he used in shows, but the real ones from his own life. The circuit rider who had taught him lute at 9 years old in exchange for labor on his farm. The years of drifting from settlement to settlement after his parents died within the same winter of separate fevers. The gradual realization that he could make a living at music not because he was the most technically gifted player anyone had seen, but because he genuinely wanted to understand the people he was playing for, and that want translated into something they could feel. "You have been alone a long time," Vola said one night, not as an observation about his emotional state which would have embarrassed him, but as a simple factual statement about his history. "I have," he said. "So have I," she said, "for different reasons." "Tell me," he said. So she told him about the clan split, about her uncle Rogan and the Treaty Iron, about the Stonecrag clan holding the bond, about the legal encumbrance on her ability to make any formal arrangement, until the iron was returned or the debt discharged. She told it plainly, without drama, but she watched his face while she told it and noted the exact quality of his attention. He did not look alarmed. He did not look like he was calculating an exit. He looked like he was listening to a problem and thinking about it. "What does Stonecrag want for the iron?" he asked. "That is the complication," Vola said. "Stonecrag's clan leader, Keth, does not want the debt paid. He wants the Ironblood name to remain encumbered. Because if my name is compromised, any arrangement I make is vulnerable. And if my arrangements are vulnerable, I am vulnerable. And a vulnerable Ironblood is useful to him for reasons that go beyond the iron itself." "Political leverage," Thomas said. "Leverage, yes. Keth and my uncle have an arrangement. My uncle gives Keth the Ironblood name's compromise as a tool, and Keth backs my uncle in the succession dispute." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "So you are being used as a bargaining piece by two men you did not consent to be used by. That is one way to describe it. Is there another way?" "No," she said. "That is the correct description." He looked at her steadily. "What would free you from it?" "Returning the treaty iron," she said. "Or making a bond so thoroughly established that Keth and my uncle cannot challenge it without revealing the corruption of their own arrangement. The Iron Route Path." Thomas said, "The Iron Route Path is the one where the courtship is conducted quietly and becomes real before any formal challenge can be mounted." Vola looked at him carefully. "You know the term." "I have traveled in orc-adjacent circles for a long time," he said. "I listen when people explain things." He paused. "That is what you are doing with the offerings." "Yes. You told me in the beginning you were being practical." "I am being practical," she said. "And the other thing I described, the impractical thing, both at once. I would prefer that you know both." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. The fire in the cookhouse had burned down to a good steady glow, and the camp outside was deep in the night silence of men and women sleeping before another hard day's work. "I am not a political asset," he said at last. "I am a musician with patched boots and a borrowed bunk. If your uncle or Keth wanted to challenge a bond between us, I am not sure what standing I would have to resist it." "You would not need standing," Vola said. "I would have standing. The Iron Root tradition grants the bonded pair the right to stand in the clan council jointly. What I would need from you is not political status. What I would need is for you to have chosen this clearly and with full knowledge." "And if I were to do that," Thomas said, "and then Keth decided to make things difficult for me personally?" "Then I would handle Keth," Vola said, in a tone that indicated this was not a hypothetical. Thomas looked at her. He looked at her the way he had looked at her that first morning on the log, thoroughly and without hurry, and Vola let him. "I believe you," he said. "I know," she said. He picked up the lute and played 3 quiet notes and then stopped. He looked at the strings. "You were going to leave a third offering," he said, "even if I had not asked to know any of this." "Yes. You would have left it even if I had slept through that one too." "The first one and the second one, yes," she said. "The third one is different. The third one I would not leave unless I was certain you understood what it meant." "What does it mean?" "It means I want you as my own," she said simply. "It means I am asking you to let me be your woman and you to be my man with everything that entails." The fire crackled. Somewhere outside, the wind moved through the black pines with a sound like water. "Tell me something honestly," Thomas said. "If there were no clan problem, no uncle, no Stonecrag leverage, no Iron Root Path, no political reason for any of this, would you still have come up this mountain road to find me?" Vola did not hesitate. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I was alone," she said, "and I had been alone long enough to know the difference between alone and lonely, and I had decided I was done with lonely. And when Braga told me about a wandering musician at a mountain camp who sees the things in front of him for what they actually are, I wanted to see for myself. And then I did, and I found that I wanted more than 1 week of seeing." Thomas set the lute carefully on the bench beside him and looked at her. Not at her face, or her hands, or any particular part of her, but at all of her at once, the way he looked at the full shape of a piece of music before he played it. "Then I think," he said slowly, that I need to hear about this third offering. The first snow came 3 days later, a light dusting that settled on the camp like a rumor of what was coming, and it was the same morning that Vola left the third offering. Thomas was not asleep for this one. She had waited until he had gone to the wash house before breakfast and then slipped into the bunk room and placed the bundle on the shelf with great deliberation. A length of braided cord, copper and green, the colors of the Ironblood line, woven around a small iron ring. The third offering in the old tradition meant what she had told him it meant. It was a declaration with no ambiguity in it, and the response it invited was equally unambiguous. Thomas came back from the wash house to find it, and he sat with it for a long time in the empty bunk room with the early light coming gray and cold through the high window and the sound of the camp waking around him. Then he put on his coat, picked up his loot, and went to find Vola. She was at the edge of the camp's eastern clearing, checking the trap line she maintained for the camp's safety perimeter, and she did not look around when she heard him coming because she had known his footsteps since the first week. Thomas stopped beside her. He looked at the eastern slope, white-dusted and vast, dropping away into the dark green of the old forest far below. He looked at the sky, which was the particular pale color of early winter, delicate and threatening at once. "I am not a political match," he said. "I need to say that one more time so it is said." "I heard you the first time," Vola said. "I am also not likely to become significantly more prosperous in the immediate future. My plan at the end of the timber season was to travel south and find winter work at a town hall or a decent tavern." "Thomas," Vola said, "I am aware these are not persuasive selling points. Thomas, I am getting there." "Please get there at a slightly accelerated pace," she said, "because it is cold and I have 4 more traps to check." He turned from the slope and looked at her directly. The cold had put color in her cheeks, the deep olive of it flushing faintly at the cheekbones, and her copper rings caught the thin winter light, and she was looking at him with the same patient, undeflectable attention she had been turning on him since that first morning on the log. "I accept the third offering," he said, "with full understanding of what it means, and with full intention to honor what it means. I have been alone a long time, and I have been looking at you for 3 weeks, and I want very much to not be alone anymore, and specifically I want to not be alone with you." A beat of quiet. "That is," he added, "a rather more direct sentence than I intended to deliver, so I apologize if the phrasing lacks refinement." Vola stepped toward him and put her hand against the side of his face, her thumb along his cheekbone, warm and certain, and looked at him from close enough that he could see the complex dark amber of her eyes. "I do not need refinement," she said. "I need exactly what you just said." Then she kissed him, simple and direct and warm, and Thomas brought his free hand up to cover hers where it lay against his jaw, and the mountain stood cold and white around them with absolutely no opinion about what was happening between them. When she pulled back, he was smiling in a way that reached his eyes and kept going. "4 more traps," he said. "4 more traps," she confirmed. "I will walk with you," he said. "I know," she said. The trouble arrived 2 weeks later, carried up the mountain road by 3 riders on black horses in the early afternoon, and Thomas saw it from the cookhouse window before anyone else. He recognized the standard they carried, a double tusk on gray, which was the Stonecrag clan's traveling mark. They were not orcs, which was interesting. They were human men, hired riders, which told him that Keth of Stonecrag was using proxies for this particular errand, the kind of approach that signaled he wanted deniability. Thomas set down his bowl and went to find Vola. She was in the equipment shed sharpening an axe when he walked in and said, "3 Stonecrag riders just came up the mountain." Vola set down the axe with the exact measured care of someone who did not want to throw it. "How long ago?" she asked. "They are crossing the south clearing now. They will be at the gate in 5 minutes. Vola stood and rolled down her sleeves and picked up the axe again, then reconsidered and hung it back on the rack. She was not going to lead with steel, not first. "How do they seem?" she asked. "Confident," Thomas said. The kind of confidence that comes from believing they have something on you. They do have something on me, Vola said calmly. That is the point. She looked at him. Whatever they say, I need you to know that I have told you the truth about our situation. Everything I have told you is accurate. I know, Thomas said. Whatever they say. She looked at him for one moment with something in her face that was not quite vulnerability, but was the thing that lives just beside it. And then she nodded and walked out to meet the riders. The riders pulled up in front of the main cookhouse, where a small crowd of the camp's workers had gathered with the casual interest of people who welcome any interruption to the daily routine. The lead rider was a heavy-set man with a red beard and the manner of a bailiff, someone accustomed to delivering unpleasant information and watching people absorb it. "Vola Ironblood," he said, not as a greeting. "Yes," she said, standing in the camp's main clearing with her feet planted and her hands loose at her sides, and all 12 pounds of her absolute composure on display. "I carry a message from Keth of Stonecrag, regarding the matter of the Ironblood treaty iron held as bond by the Stonecrag clan." He reached into his coat and produced a folded document sealed in gray wax. "Stonecrag has been made aware that you are conducting an informal courtship at this camp, and Keth wishes to remind you that any arrangement you attempt to formalize is subject to challenge, while the Ironblood bond debt remains outstanding." "I am aware of the law," Vola said. "Keth also wishes to advise you," the writer continued, with the particular relish of a man who enjoys this part, "that he is prepared to offer you a resolution to the bond debt. He will return the treaty iron in exchange for a single concession." "And what concession is that?" Vola asked. "Your Uncle Rogan has proposed a formal alliance between the Ironblood name and the Stonecrag line. Keth is willing to accept a betrothal arrangement between yourself and Keth's nephew, Doran, as satisfaction of the debt and resolution of the succession question." The camp was entirely silent. The wind moved through the pines at the clearing's edge with a sound that seemed very loud. "I'm not available for betrothal arrangement with Keth's nephew," Vola said in a voice that was perfectly even. "That is your right," the writer said. "Keth simply wanted you to know the offer stands." He paused. "He also wanted you to know that he will be sending a formal clan representative to this camp within 1 month to assess the status of any informal arrangements you may have made and to determine whether a challenge is appropriate." "Tell Keth," Vola said, "that I have received his message." The writer folded the document back into his coat, nodded with the air of someone who has accomplished a task that was mildly distasteful but financially rewarding, and wheeled his horse. The 3 riders left the camp the way they had come, and the crowd dispersed in the slow, deliberate way of people pretending they had not been watching intently. Thomas had stood at the edge of the cookhouse steps through all of it, and when the crowd thinned he came down and stood beside her. "A month," he said. "A month," she agreed. "And if Keth's representative comes and finds the Iron Root path established, what happens? He can challenge it before the clan council. If the challenge succeeds, the arrangement is void. If it fails, the bond stands and the treaty iron must be returned. What makes the challenge succeed or fail?" "Evidence of the bond's reality and free consent," Vola said. "The camp people would need to attest to what they have seen. You would need to speak for yourself. And I would need to demonstrate that the arrangement was made with full knowledge on both sides." Thomas looked at her. "All of that is true," he said. "All of it is true," she agreed. "Then what is the problem?" "The problem," she said, "is that Keth's representative will not be content with simple testimony. He will look for any weakness in the arrangement, any indication that it was made for strategic reasons rather than genuine ones. And there will also, almost certainly, be a physical challenge." "Physical challenge," Thomas repeated. "A formal challenge is often accompanied by a test of the bond's sincerity. It is typically proposed by the challenger and involves a physical contest between the challenger's champion and someone representing the bonded pair." She paused. "It is Stonecrag custom. Keth will use it. And if the challenger's champion wins, the challenge advances. The bond is subject to council review." Thomas looked at the gate through which the riders had left. He looked at the mountain road curving down through the trees. He looked at Vola. "Would the champion be fighting you," he said, "or me?" "Me," Vola said. "Unless you chose to take the field, which you would not, because the tradition holds that the champion must be the one whose bond is being challenged." "Good," Thomas said. "I mean not good in the sense of good, but good in the sense that I was not looking forward to that." "You would have done it," Vola said with certainty. "Extremely badly," he said. "But yes." She looked at him then with something that was entirely uncomplicated in it, entirely direct, and put her hand briefly on his arm. "We have a month," she said. "Let us use it well." They used it well. The mountain autumn closed around Iron Peak with the brisk, beautiful urgency of a season that knows it is ending. And Thomas and Vola moved through it together in the easy companionship of two people who had decided to stop pretending. They were not already in a relationship, and were now simply in one. He played in the evenings and she sat in her usual spot and they talked afterward. But now there was a different quality to the talking, the particular depth that comes from two people who are no longer wondering what the other person is, who know, and are finding new rooms in that knowing. He took to walking with her on her trail rounds in the early morning, before his day began in earnest. The mountain in that hour was extraordinary, all cold blue shadow and the sound of the first birds, and they walked mostly in comfortable quiet with occasional conversation that surfaced and submerged naturally, the way good conversation does when it does not need to work for itself. He told her about the music he was building, a long piece that was trying to be something like a map of the roads he had traveled, all the way from the southern coast market towns to the high mountain passes, with a theme for each place that was not a description but a feeling. He played her pieces of it in the evenings, working it out in real time, and she listened with the same quality of attention she gave everything, total and unhurried. She told him about her mother, who had been the head of the Ironblood line before her death, a woman of considerable political intelligence and physical force, who had built alliances across 3 clan territories through a combination of genuine diplomatic skill and the underlying awareness that she could break most people in half if diplomacy failed. She had died of a fever 4 years before the clan split, and Vola had been learning the political dimensions of her loss in the years since, because it was only after her mother was gone that Vola had understood how much of the clan's stability had been maintained by that particular personality. "She sounds like someone I would have been frightened of," Thomas said one evening. "Everyone was a little frightened of her," Vola said. "I was frightened of her sometimes, and I loved her completely." "Those are not incompatible things," Thomas said. "No," Vola agreed. "They are not." One night, 3 weeks into the month, Thomas woke in the small hours with a melody in his head that would not wait. He got up quietly, wrapped his coat around his shoulders, took his lute outside, and sat on the log outside the cookhouse in the freezing mountain dark and played it through while the stars were extraordinary overhead and the camp slept around him. He had been playing for perhaps 20 minutes when he heard movement and turned to find Vola settling onto the log beside him, wrapped in her travel blanket, her copper rings dim in the starlight. "The melody woke you?" she asked. "It always does," he said. "This one has been waiting. I think it is the piece I was telling you about, the one that is trying to be a map. I think this is the end of it." "Play it," she said. He played it through. It was long and complex and very quiet, and it moved through what felt like a lifetime of roads and rooms and campfires, and the particular feeling of a fire seen from outside in the cold, that warmth at a distance, and it came at the end to something that felt like arrival, not triumph, just the real and simple warmth of being somewhere you meant to be. When he finished, the silence felt different from the silence before. "That is the best thing I have heard you play," Vola said. "I know," he said. "It surprised me." He was looking up at the stars, and she was looking at him, and then she said, quietly in the dark of the mountain night, "I need you to know that whatever happens with Keth's representative, whatever the outcome of the challenge, I am not asking you to be brave for me. I have been managing this situation for 5 years, and I am capable of managing it further. What I want you to understand is that I am no longer willing to manage it alone, not because I cannot, but because you have been beside me for a month and I have noticed the difference, and I do not want to give that up. Thomas turned from the stars and looked at her. The mountain dark was around them and the stars were overhead, and she was looking at him with that amber-eyed directness that he had stopped being undone by in the early weeks and was now simply in love with, which was a different thing. "Vola," he said. "Yes. I have been in love with you for approximately 2.5 weeks," he said. "I did not say so because I was not certain it was the appropriate moment. I am saying so now because I think this is the appropriate moment." She was quiet. "I also want to say," he continued, "that I am aware you are significantly stronger than me, significantly better in a fight, and significantly more politically capable than me in your own world, and none of that changes anything I just said. I am not in love with you because I think you need me. I am in love with you because you are the most interesting, honest, and genuinely remarkable person I have encountered in 28 years of paying close attention to people." "Thomas," Vola said. "Yes." "Come here," she said. He came here. She pulled him close with the careful, deliberate strength of a woman who understood exactly how strong she was and was choosing to be gentle. And the blanket came around both of them. And the night was cold, and the stars were enormous. And he kissed her in the dark with his whole heart in it. And she kissed him back with everything she had been holding since she stood in the bunk room doorway and watched him sleep. When they finally sat back, still close, her arm around his shoulders, his head tilted against the curve of her jaw, he said, "I have been wanting to do that for 3 weeks." "I know," she said. "You knew. Thomas, I am not subtle when I want something. I assumed you knew and were taking your time." "I was being respectful," he said. "You were being extremely respectful," she said. "It was admirable and also a little bit maddening." He laughed in the dark, warm against her shoulder. "The third offering was not subtle either," he said. "The third offering was a direct statement of intent," she agreed. "In retrospect, it is remarkable that you did not faint." "I thought about it," he said. "I weighed the options." She pressed a kiss to the top of his head with the unself-conscious warmth of someone who had stopped performing composure about something she felt directly, and he stayed very still because he wanted to remember exactly what this felt like. The cold and the stars and the fire smell from the cookhouse and her arms solid and warm around him. "Whatever comes with Keth's man," he said quietly, "I am going to be standing beside you." "I know," she said. "I just wanted to say it." "I heard you," she said. "And I want you to know that it matters." The Stonecrag representative arrived on a gray morning with the first real snow of the season falling in earnest, and he came with 7 people and a considerable amount of attitude. His name was Brath, and he was a Stonecrag clan second, a broad orc man with silver-touched hair and the particular manner of someone who had spent 20 years as a political enforcer, and considered this appearance at a logging camp to be well below his usual operating level. He had a champion with him, a young orc man named Gorvash, who was built like a stone tower and had the confident, slightly blank expression of someone who had won every physical contest he had entered for the past several years and had stopped considering the possibility of any other outcome. Brath presented himself at the camp's main gate with his document of authority and his party of witnesses and his champion, and requested, in the correct formal language, the presentation of Vola Ironblood for the purpose of a formal bond challenge review. Vola came out to meet him in the falling snow with Thomas at her side, and the camp's entire working population arranged behind them in the loose, interested way of people who had decided to witness something and were not going to be subtle about it. Brath read the formal challenge statement. That Stonecrag clan had cause to believe that the Ironblood name's current bond debt rendered any informal courtship arrangement invalid, that the representative of the bonded party was requested to respond, and that per Stonecrag custom, the question of the bond's legitimacy would be tested by a formal champion contest, the outcome of which would determine whether the challenge advanced to clan council. He then looked at Gorvash, who cracked his knuckles. "You may designate your champion," Brath said to Vola, with the air of a man who does not expect this to take long. "I designate myself," Vola said. There was a murmur through the crowd. Gorvash looked at her for the first time with actual attention, recalibrating something. Brath consulted his documents. "The tradition allows the bonded party to act as their own champion," he said. "However, I would note that Gorvash has not lost a formal contest in. I am aware of Gorvash's record," Vola said. "I designate myself." Brath straightened up. "Very well. The contest will be held in the camp clearing. Unarmed combat, first to yield or be unable to rise. 3 witnesses per side. Witnesses for the challenge, my party. Witnesses for the defendant." "We will witness," said Petra from behind Vola, stepping forward, and with her came Oswald, the foreman, and half a dozen of the loggers who had been sitting in Vola's section of the cookhouse every night for a month. And that group included 3 men who outweighed Brath's witnesses by a significant margin, and were watching Gorvash with the particular calm of people who would like to see how this goes. The contest was held in the main clearing with the snow coming down light and steady, and the whole camp watching, and it was the kind of thing that would be talked about on this mountain for years. Gorvash was enormous, fast for his size, and had clearly spent a great deal of time learning to use those 2 qualities together. He came at Vola with the professional purposefulness of a man who had been in formal contests many times and had a routine that worked, and she let him come, which was the first thing that shifted the mood of the crowd, because every experienced fighter watching understood that letting someone come at you was either reckless or a decision. It was a decision. She let him commit to his first move, which was a grab-and-throw sequence, and stepped inside it in the last half-second with a precise, violent economy that redirected his entire weight to his left side. And then she moved with him instead of against him, and Gorvash found himself going down face-first in the snow with his arm locked in a joint that did not want to go in the direction she was taking it. And she was on top of him with the full weight of her positioned in a way that made getting up a project rather than a reflex. Gorvash tried to rise. She adjusted. He tried again. She adjusted again. This went on for about 45 seconds, which sounds short but felt, to everyone watching, like considerably longer, because those 45 seconds contained a sustained display of technical skill and absolute physical control that was more impressive than any quick finish would have been. The crowd was completely silent for the first 30 seconds, and then roared on the 31st when Gorvash tried to push up with his full strength and Vola simply held, absorbing it, immovable. Brath was watching with the expression of a man recalculating something significant. Gorvash said, clearly, and with the genuine respect of a good fighter recognizing he was beaten, "Yield." Vola released him and stood up. The crowd erupted. Not politely, not carefully, but with the full-throated roar of people who had been watching a woman they had worked alongside for 2 months prove something they had already believed. And the snow was falling, and the mountains were enormous around the tiny clearing, and it was the most purely satisfying sound Thomas Dawson had ever heard, and he was not someone easily moved by crowd noise. He was standing at the front of the camp side of the crowd, and when Vola walked back from the field he met her eyes first, and she looked at him with a full and uncomplicated satisfaction that was different from triumph and better than it. Brath cleared his throat. "Per the terms of the contest," he said, with the careful precision of a man addressing something he did not expect to be addressing, "the defense has prevailed. The formal challenge will not advance to council review at this time." He paused. "However, the matter of the treaty iron bond debt remains. You will tell Keth," Vola said, "that I am aware of the bond debt. You will also tell him that I have prevailed in his formal challenge, and that I intend to pursue the recovery of the treaty iron through the proper traditional channels, and that any further interference in my arrangements will be treated as a breach of traditional law." Brath looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a professional reassessing a situation. "I will deliver your message," he said. "Thank you," Vola said. "You are welcome to stay at the camp tonight if you need to rest before the road." Brath, with the adaptability of a pragmatist, accepted. That evening, Gorvash came to find Vola in the cookhouse, and he sat across from her with a directness that matched her own and said, "I want to tell you that was the best technical hold I have been put in. I would learn from you if you were willing to teach it." Vola looked at him for a moment and decided she liked him. "It is an Ironblood method," she said. "My mother taught it to me. Come find me tomorrow morning before you ride out and I will show you the entry." Gorvash nodded. He looked across the cookhouse to where Thomas was playing something slow and warm and satisfied. "Your man plays well," he said. "He does," Vola said. Gorvash looked at Vola with a candor that young fighters sometimes have, a willingness to say the obvious thing. "Keth is going to escalate," he said. "He does not like losing." "I know," Vola said. "He will go after the treaty iron itself. He will try to bind it more formally before you can move to recover it. I know that too. You should move quickly." "I intend to," Vola said. She did not tell Thomas the last piece of it until later that night, after the camp had quieted and they were sitting together by the fire with her head against his shoulder and his arm around her, which had become in the past 3 weeks the most natural configuration of Thomas Dawson in the world. "I need to go to the Stonecrag settlement," she said. "Before the pass is close. I need to see the treaty iron." He was quiet. Then, "How far?" 4 days' ride east. "Through the high pass." "Yes." He was quiet again. Outside, the wind had picked up and the snow was serious now, the kind that meant the season was turning hard and fast. "When do you want to leave?" he said. "Thomas, I'm not asking you to. When?" he said. She looked up at him. He was looking at the fire with that patient, steady expression, and there was nothing uncertain in it. 3 days, she said, "to prepare properly." 3 days, he agreed. "I will talk to Oswald about ending my contract early. He will understand." Vola sat up enough to look at him fully. "You would end your contract, your winter income." "I would end my contract," he said simply. "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment, and then she put her hand on his jaw and turned his face toward her, and kissed him the way she felt about him, which was to say completely and without reservation, and he kissed her back the same way, and the fire burned warm and the snow came down outside, and the mountain held them both. They left on the 3rd morning, 2 riders on Oswald's toughest mountain horses, which the foreman lent without ceremony and with the characteristic Oswald offer of help that was a flat statement. If they needed backup, he could spare 4 men. Vola thanked him. Thomas shook his hand. They rode east as the sun came over the peaks, into a pale, cold day that tasted like iron and pine, and the particular clean severity of high mountain winter. The ride was hard and beautiful and mostly quiet in the way that good company is quiet, companionable and sufficient. Thomas was a competent rider rather than a brilliant one, which he acknowledged freely, and Vola set a pace he could keep without difficulty, and they talked as they rode about things both large and small. The political situation ahead, the music he was still building in his head, the way the old-growth forest looked under the first real snow, enormous and indifferent and magnificent. On the 2nd night, camped in the shelter of a rock formation with a fire Vola had built from wet wood that should not have burned as well as it did, she told him the rest of the clan history, the pieces she had held back. About her uncle's specific grievance, which was not really political but personal, a resentment of Vola's mother that had calcified over decades into a conviction that the Ironblood line should have gone differently, should have been his, and that Vola herself was the embodiment of an injustice he had spent his life nursing. Thomas listened through all of it and then said, "He does not actually want the succession. He wants to undo a decision that was made before you were born." "Yes," Vola said, "and that is not something that can be given to him. No. So there is no resolution where he is satisfied. He can be neutralized," Vola said. "The treaty iron returned to the Ironblood line removes his leverage entirely. Without Keth's backing, his political position collapses. He is not a man who does well without leverage. And Keth's backing ends if Stonecrag loses the treaty iron. Keth wants the bond debt because it is useful. If it becomes a liability, if pursuing it costs him more than the advantage gives him, he will let it go. Keth is entirely practical. Thomas looked at the fire. What is our actual plan for the treaty iron? Vola was quiet for a moment. There is a wager tradition in Stonecrag custom, she said. A formal wager that can be brought against any held bond. If the wagering party can demonstrate that the bond was extracted under conditions of coercion or bad faith, and can win the demonstration contest, the bond is void. Demonstration contest, Thomas said. A skill contest. The nature of which is proposed by the challenging party and must be accepted by Stonecrag's representative. She looked at him. I proposed my wager to Keth through formal channels 2 weeks ago. He accepted it last week, before he sent Brath. The demonstration contest is scheduled for when I arrive. Thomas looked at her. You had this planned. I had this in motion, she said. The plan required getting through the formal challenge first. Brath's visit was both an attempt to stop me and inadvertently the last step I needed before the wager. What did you propose as the skill contest? Vola looked at the fire. A musical performance contest, she said. I proposed it because it was the one form of contest Keth could not refuse without appearing to fear it. Since Stonecrag clan hosts a traditional music gathering every year and considers itself generous to that tradition. And I proposed it, she paused, because I know a musician. Thomas sat with this for a long moment. You are telling me, he said, that the recovery of your clan's treaty iron and the resolution of a 5-year political dispute depends in part on my playing. Yes, Vola said, in a formal wager before Stonecrag witnesses. Yes. Against whom? Keth has a court musician, Vola said. His name is Findar. He is technically gifted and plays for competitions regularly. Thomas looked at the fire for a long time. Then he looked at Vola. Why did you not tell me this earlier? He asked. Because I did not want you to do it for strategic reasons, she said. I wanted you to come because you chose to come. The wager was a separate thing and I needed to know the first thing was true before I put the second thing to you. He was quiet. The fire cracked and resettled. Is it, she asked, true, I mean, that you chose to come? Yes, he said without hesitation. Then do you also choose to play? He looked at her. She was watching him with the full weight of her attention, and there was something in her face that was neither commanding nor entreating, just fully and honestly herself, wanting him, hoping, not hiding either. I choose to play, he said. She let out a breath that was not quite a sigh and not quite a laugh but was something in between that he had not heard from her before, and he understood it was relief. Good, she said. Tell me everything about Findar, he said. I want to know what I am walking into. She told him everything she knew, and they stayed up late talking strategy by the fire. And at some point the conversation shifted from strategy to other things. And at some point later, with the cold at bay and the fire warm and the mountain dark and enormous around their small shelter, she pulled him close with that careful, deliberate strength, and he wrapped his arms around her. And the talking stopped for a time and something better took its place, warm and real and unguarded. The kind of intimacy that comes not from performance but from two people who have decided to stop being separate things. And the mountain night was long and the fire burned down slow, and Thomas Dawson lay awake in the small hours with Vola asleep against him and felt, for the first time in a long time, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The Stonecrag settlement was a serious, well-built cluster of long halls and stone storage buildings in a sheltered valley below the east-facing slope of the range, larger than Thomas had expected, with a population of several hundred and the particular self-possession of a community that had been where it was for a long time and intended to remain. They rode in on the 4th afternoon, and the gates were open, which told Thomas that Vola's formal arrival had been expected and acknowledged. Keth received them in the main hall with the deliberate formality of a clan leader who wanted the record to show he had been correct in everything. He was older than Thomas had imagined, broad and gray and politically careful, with the kind of intelligence that operates mostly in calculation. He looked at Thomas with a brief, assessing glance that categorized him quickly as not a fighter and not a political figure, and moved on. Vola made the formal declaration of her wager in the correct language, and Keth accepted it in the correct language, and the contest was set for the following evening before the settlement's assembled population, which was the Stonecrag custom. Findar came to find Thomas that evening in the guest quarters, which Thomas appreciated for its directness. Findar was young, perhaps 23, thin and precise with the fingers of someone who had been playing since childhood, and he was direct enough to come to Thomas's room before the contest and look him over and say, "I am told you are the Ironblood woman's musician." "I am told that as well," Thomas said. "I have won every formal contest I have entered for 2 years," Findar said. It was not a boast. It was an honest statement of record, the way a soldier might state his battle history. "I am told that too," Thomas said. He looked at Findar for a moment with the head-tilted attention. "What do you play best?" Findar paused, slightly thrown by the question. "Competition pieces," he said, "technically demanding, structured for judged performance." "And what do you play when no one is judging you?" Thomas asked. Findar was quiet. "I am not asking to find a weakness," Thomas said. "I am asking because I am trying to understand what kind of contest this is going to be. Because there is a difference between a contest judged on technical achievement and a contest judged on something else. The Stonecrag tradition judges on response," Findar said slowly. "The assembled audience determines which performance they found more compelling." "Then it is not about technique at all," Thomas said. Findar looked at him. "I mean no disrespect to your technique," Thomas said. "I am certain it is considerable, but technique is a tool. The contest is about what the room feels when you finish, and that is a different thing." Findar was quiet for a moment, and then he said, with the honest uncertainty of someone encountering an idea that does not sit comfortably, "You sound very confident." "I am not confident," Thomas said. "I am nervous. But I know what I play best and I know what works in a room, and those two things together are what I have." Findar looked at him for another moment, and then he nodded slowly with the particular respect of a craftsman recognizing another craftsman's understanding of his own work, even if the work is different. "Good luck to you then," he said. "And to you," Thomas said, and meant it. The hall was full the following evening, every bench and standing space taken, the fire in the great central hearth burning high and hot, the smell of pine smoke and roasting meat, and the particular charged electricity of a community that has gathered for something that matters. Keth sat in the formal chair of judgment at the hall's head. Brath was beside him with the treaty iron in a case, visible as evidence of what the wager was for. Vola sat in the front bench of the audience section, straight-backed, her copper rings bright in the firelight, and she did not look at Thomas when he came in because she was giving him the space to do this without her attention on him, which he recognized and appreciated. Findar played first. He played 2 pieces of considerable technical beauty, precise and formal and genuinely impressive, the kind of music that demonstrated mastery in the way a finely made weapon demonstrates its maker's skill. The hall appreciated it appropriately. Thomas sat to the side and listened with full attention and thought about what he was going to do. Then it was Thomas's turn. He sat on the performance stool with his lute across his knee and the full weight of the hall's attention on him, and he felt the nerves that were always there before a show and underneath them something that was not nervous at all, something that was certain and quiet and had Vola's name on it. He played the piece he had been building for 6 months, the Map of Roads piece, the one that had come to him in the dark of the mountain night, and that he had completed in his head on the ride east. He played it all the way through for the first time as a complete work, and it was, he knew as he was playing it, the best thing he had made. It began with the South Coast markets and moved through all the roads he had traveled, all the rooms he had played in, all the loneliness and the extraordinary human business of being alive in a world that was mostly indifferent to you. And it came through all of that to the end. He had found in the dark of the mountain camp that sense of arrival, of warmth earned and warmth real. And he played that last section with his eyes open and Vola in his direct line of sight, and she was watching him now. The hall was entirely silent when he finished. Then it was loud. Not the polite appreciation for a formal performance, but the kind of sound that breaks out of a room when something has been felt, the unruly, involuntary roar of a crowd that was moved and is not quite sure what to do about it. And it rolled through the Stonecrag Hall and up into the rafters, and Findar, sitting to the side, looked at Thomas with the honest expression of a musician who has just heard what the ceiling of the craft looks like. Keth sat with his hands on the arms of his chair for a long moment, and his face was complicated, the face of a practical man who had made a calculation and was now receiving new information about the accuracy of that calculation. The assessment was made by the traditional method, which was a show of hands by the assembled hall. It was not close. Keth looked at the result and then looked at Brath, and Brath looked back with the expression of a man who has nothing to add. "The wager is satisfied," Keth said. "The treaty iron returns to the Ironblood line." Brath brought the case forward and set it on the table in front of Vola. She opened it and looked at the treaty iron, a bar of worked iron about the length of a forearm, marked with the Ironblood sigil, and she picked it up and held it with both hands, and Thomas, watching from his seat, saw her eyes close for just a moment. Then she looked up and across the hall to him, and what was on her face was not triumph or relief or political satisfaction. It was something simpler and larger than all of those things. He looked back at her and felt something in his chest that was both the most specific and the most enormous thing he had ever felt. Keth said, formally, "The bond debt between Stonecrag and Ironblood is hereby discharged. Any formal challenge to the Ironblood name's arrangements is withdrawn." "Received," Vola said. "And acknowledged." She stood and looked at Keth directly. "I have no further dispute with Stonecrag. I would prefer that we not have occasion to meet like this again." Keth, with the pragmatism of a man who has lost a political contest fairly and knows it, said, "That preference is mutual." They left the next morning in hard, cold sunshine. The passes clear and the road west open before them, and Vola carried the treaty iron in her saddlebag and rode with the particular quality of a person whose spine has been unclenched for the first time in years. Thomas rode beside her and played a harmonica he had traded for at the Stonecrag market that morning, because he had lost his in the pack somewhere and needed something to do with his hands when he was thinking, and Vola listened with the patient appreciation of a woman who had come to find music in the texture of her days. "Your uncle," Thomas said on the first night's camp. "The bond debt is gone, but he is still there." "He is still there," Vola agreed. But without Keth's backing, his position in the succession dispute collapses. He will need to make peace or leave the line. He will most likely make a small peace and be quietly furious about it for the rest of his life. "Does that worry you?" "A little," she said honestly, "but my uncle is a man who does his worst damage from a position of strength. Without the leverage, he is diminished. He knows it and I know it, and he knows that I know it." Thomas thought about that. "Will he accept me?" "He will not like you," Vola said. "He will not like anything connected to me, but he will not be in a position to act against you, and that is sufficient for now." "That is a diplomatic answer." "It is an honest answer," she said. "I am not going to tell you that my family will embrace you with open arms, Thomas. Some of them will, in time. Some of them will need to see more before they decide. My uncle will need to see the next 5 years before he commits to any position, and even then it will be grudging." Thomas nodded. "And what do you need from me with regard to all of that?" Vola looked at him. "I need exactly what you have been doing," she said. "To be present and honest and to play the way you play and to be the person you are and to let people form their own opinions." "I can do that." "I know you can," she said. "It is one of the things She stopped. Thomas waited. One of the things I love about you," she finished, in the direct and slightly defiant tone of a woman who has decided to say the difficult true thing. Thomas looked at her in the firelight with the full warmth of his attention. "Say that again," he said. "I love you," she said more clearly this time, without the defiance, just the truth of it, unguarded. He crossed the distance between them and kissed her with the same unguarded entirety, and she made a small sound against his mouth that was relief and wanting and home all at once, and they held each other in the mountain cold with the fire at their backs, and the stars were overhead, and Thomas Dawson thought, "There it is." They rode back into Iron Peak on a clear afternoon with a light snowfall beginning, and Petra came out of the cookhouse to watch them ride through the gate and said, with the exact economy of a woman who had seen everything and commented on very little of it, "Good. You are back. I saved your bunk and I could use someone to play tonight because the Haverson brothers have been trying to sing, and it has been a trial for everyone." Thomas laughed and swung down from the horse and shook Petra's hand and felt, for the second time in a week, the very specific sensation of arriving somewhere he was supposed to be. The camp settled back into its rhythm, but the rhythm was different now, or rather it was the same, but Thomas was different in it. He played in the evenings with a new quality that the camp's population registered without being able to name. A fullness, something lived in, something that had moved from seeking to having. Vola sat in her place and listened with her eyes on him, and if the others noticed that these two had come back from an eastward journey with the particular settled warmth of people who had passed some significant point of no return, they had the tact to comment only in Petra's direction, which Petra absorbed without adding to. Thomas finished the map of roads piece properly, wrote it down in the notation he had developed over years of traveling and annotating, and one evening played it through for Vola alone, every note of it in the empty cookhouse after everyone else had gone to bed. She listened with her eyes closed. When he finished, she sat for a long time. "What will you do with it?" she asked. "Play it," he said. "Wherever I go." "Wherever we go," she said. He looked at her. "Wherever we go," he agreed. She opened her eyes and looked at him with the full and certain warmth of a woman who has made her decision, and made it with her whole self. "I have a formal intention I need to tell you about," she said. Thomas set the lute aside, listening. "With the treaty iron returned, I can pursue the formal clan arrangement I was not able to before. I intend to present the bond to the Ironblood line's remaining council, which consists of my mother's sister, my cousin Braga, and 2 elder members of the line, as a formal registered bond. This will make our arrangement official by Ironblood custom, and will confirm the Iron Route path as a completed process." Thomas nodded. "Tell me what that requires." "A formal declaration of intent from both parties," she said, "before the clan witnesses. It is not a ceremony in the sense of rings and vows. It is simply a declaration that the bond exists, that it was freely chosen, and that both parties intend to honor it. And then we are formally bonded." "Then we are formally bonded," she said, "by Ironblood custom." Thomas picked up the treaty iron which was sitting on the table between them and turned it over in his hands, the weight of it, the history in it, the thing she had spent 5 years trying to recover. "I have a declaration of intent to make," he said. "Vola Ironblood. I found you sleeping adjacent at a logging camp in the mountains of Iron Peak, which is not a sentence I expected to ever form, and I have spent the past 2 months discovering that you are the most honest, capable, astonishing, and genuinely necessary person I have met in my entire life. I intend to be bonded to you and to stay bonded to you, and to play music wherever we are, and to walk the trail rounds with you in the morning, and to be talked to honestly when I am doing something foolish, and to be the person you come home to. That is my declaration." Vola looked at him for a moment with something behind her eyes that was ancient and real, and had no name but the oldest one. "My declaration," she said, "is that I came up a mountain road to find a man worth considering, and I found considerably more than that, and I intend to keep what I found." She reached across the table and covered his hand, where it rested on the treaty iron, with both of hers. "I choose you," she said, clearly and with full knowledge as the tradition requires, and also because I want to, which the tradition does not require but which is the more important of the two." Thomas turned his hand under hers and held on. "Then we are bonded," he said. "We are bonded," she agreed. The winter came in full force the following week, burying the Iron Peak Road under 4 feet of snow that would not shift until spring. And Thomas's contract ending meant nothing practical because no one was leaving or arriving until the pass cleared anyway. He stayed on at the camp through the winter as the unofficial musician and occasional assistant to whatever needed assisting, and Vola remained as trail warden. And they shared a room that had previously been a storage space, but had been thoroughly reorganized by Petra with the crisp efficiency of someone who considers practical arrangements to be a form of kindness. And the months of deep winter passed in the particular intimacy of people who are learning to live with one another in close quarters and discovering, with ongoing relief, that this is not a problem. There were difficulties, as there are in any real life. Thomas's stubborn habit of playing until well after midnight, and then being essentially unavailable until mid-morning created friction with Vola's preference for early mornings on the trail. They negotiated this with a directness that was somewhat uncomfortable at first, and then, once they had agreed on a system, became one of the established facts of how they operated, one of those small solved problems that feel like a kind of intimacy of their own. Vola's uncle sent a letter in the second month of winter, a correct and carefully political piece of writing that acknowledged the bond through clenched teeth and stipulated certain conditions under which he would recognize the arrangement officially. Thomas read it over Vola's shoulder and said, "He writes like a man who sat with this for a month before sending it." "He probably did," Vola said. "The conditions are not unreasonable, given the context. They are designed to give him something to hold," she said. "Yes, give him the thing that does not matter and hold what does." Vola looked at him. "You are better at this than I expected." "I have spent my whole life reading rooms," he said. "A politically motivated letter is just a room with words." She wrote back with Thomas's input, conceding the small conditions her uncle had stipulated, holding the ones that mattered, and the letter went out with the next trader who came through in midwinter, and her uncle's subsequent silence was taken by both of them as a form of grudging acceptance. Braga arrived in late winter, her trade run having kept her in the valley settlements until the roads opened enough for mountain travel, and she was the first of Vola's family to meet Thomas in person. She came through the camp gate on a gray February morning and found them in the cookhouse, Thomas playing something new and Vola listening with her feet up on the bench. And Braga stood in the door for a moment and looked at them with the particular satisfaction of someone whose recommendation had been vindicated. "You," she said to Thomas. "Me," he agreed. "She looks different," Braga said, as if Vola were not present. "She is present," Vola said. "You look different," Braga said to Vola, unapologetically. "Less like a mountain you are the only one who can see." Thomas laughed. Vola looked at him with an expression that was somewhere between affronted and amused. "She is always like this," Vola told Thomas. "I like her," Thomas said. "Of course you do," Vola said. "You like anyone who says true things." Braga sat down and had coffee and spent 3 hours talking with them both, ranging across trade news and clan politics, and the state of the mountain roads and the general condition of the world. And Thomas asked her about her travels with the same attentive curiosity he brought to everything. And Braga answered with the full engagement of a woman who liked someone willing to genuinely listen. And Vola watched the two people she was most fond of in the world find each other with the ease that comes when two things belong in the same room. When Braga left to see to her trade goods, she walked past Vola and said quietly, "I was right about him." "I know," Vola said. "You are going to tell him that." "I already have." Braga looked at her cousin with the warm, unguarded pride of a woman who loves someone fiercely. "Good," she said. "You deserve it. You have been alone too long." "So has he," Vola said. "So has he," Braga agreed. "That is the thing that makes it right." The spring came slowly up the mountain, the snow retreating in stages, And with the passes opening, the camp came alive again with new timber contracts and fresh workers, and the general renewal of enterprise that comes with a mountain spring. Thomas played the evenings and the mornings and occasionally the in-between times when someone needed a song for a particular kind of sadness or joy. And he had by this point become something the camp organized itself around, the way communities sometimes do with their musicians, and he understood this for the gift it was. He played the Map of Roads piece at a spring gathering that drew workers from 3 different mountain camps to Iron Peak for a trade and social occasion, and he played it before 100 people in the cleared main yard with the mountains brilliant and snow-capped behind him, and Vola standing at the edge of the crowd in her copper-ringed braid and her trail-worn leathers. And when he came to the final section, the arrival section, the warmth at his real section, he was looking at her and she was looking at him. And the piece ended, and the silence afterward was the best silence he had ever made. The applause was significant. Thomas nodded and set the lute down and walked through the crowd to where Vola was standing, and he was stopped 3 times by people who wanted to say something about the music, and he received it all with genuine appreciation and kept moving. And when he got to her, she put her hand on the back of his neck and pulled him in and kissed him in front of every person from 3 mountain camps, which was technically a public declaration of bond claim by the Ironblood custom, and which she had done with full awareness of exactly what it was. And the crowd that had been applauding the music roared again for a different reason. Thomas, when she released him, turned slightly red and said, "Was that strategic?" "Yes," she said, "and also because I wanted to." "Those 2 things again," he said. "They come together often," she said, entirely unbothered. He laughed and put his arm around her and looked out at the mountains, enormous and cold and brilliant in the spring light, and felt the very specific and quietly astonishing sensation of being a person for whom things had worked out. The formal bond presentation to the Ironblood Clan Council happened in late spring, when the passes were fully clear and travel was easy, at a gathering held in the northern settlement where Vola's mother's sister, Aunt Mara, kept the formal Ironblood records. Thomas traveled there with Vola and Braga and stood before 4 orc elders, who looked at him with the combined weight of several centuries of clan history, and made his declaration of intent in clear and careful language, and answered Aunt Mara's questions about his background and means and intentions with the honest directness that was all he had ever had to offer. Aunt Mara asked him at the end, "What do you bring to the Ironblood name?" Thomas considered the question. "I bring honesty," he said. "I bring a particular ability to understand the people around me and to make them feel less alone. I bring complete and unconditional loyalty to the woman who has chosen me, and I bring the intention to earn that loyalty every day rather than to assume it is owed. And I bring," he paused, "a very good piece of music that I wrote for her, which I think is the most honest thing I have ever made." Aunt Mara looked at him for a long moment. She was old and very shrewd, and had the eyes of a woman who had spent a lifetime assessing people's characters at a glance. "I think you will do," she said. The formal declaration was made and recorded, and the treaty iron was presented to the council as evidence of restored standing, and the Ironblood bond between Vola and Thomas was formally registered in the clan records. And afterward, there was a feast of considerable scale, and quality, and several of Vola's cousins attempted to get Thomas drunk, and he matched them drink for drink with the easy tolerance of a man who had been playing taverns since he was 17, which improved everyone's opinion of him substantially. That night in the room Aunt Mara had given them, the mountain air soft and warm through the window with the smell of new growth and the sounds of the settlement settling into the good tiredness of a feast well attended, Vola lay beside him in the dark and said, "How do you feel?" "Thoroughly registered," he said. She laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere genuine, and he felt it against his shoulder where his arm was around her. "How do you feel really?" she asked. He thought about it. He thought about the years of roads and rooms, and the particular loneliness of moving through a world that knew you for your music, but not for yourself. He thought about a bunk room in a logging camp, and an offering on a shelf, and a morning on a log with porridge, and a woman who came and sat beside him and looked at him like he was exactly what he was, no more and no less, and found that sufficient. "I feel like I have been traveling a very long time," he said, "and I have arrived somewhere." Vola moved closer against him. "You have," she said. Autumn came around again, completing the year's circle. And Iron Peak in autumn was a thing of spectacular physical beauty, the mountain slopes going red and gold, and the air sharpening back to that particular clarity that Thomas had grown to love with the specific love you have for something that is uncomfortable and honest and very much itself. He played the timber season's final night at Iron Peak, a long show that ran from supper hour to close to midnight, for a full house of miners and loggers and the handful of traders and travelers who had come through in the season's last weeks, and he played everything. The road songs, the mountain ballads, the pieces he had built over the years, the map of roads piece twice because it was requested, and new things he had been building through the summer, pieces that were different from what he had made before in some quality he could not precisely name, but that the audience could feel. Vola sat in her place through all of it, her copper rings catching the firelight, her hands around a cup of Petra's strong tea, watching him with the full and unhurried attention that she gave to everything she cared about. When the show ended and the crowd dispersed into the cold mountain night, Thomas sat for a moment in the cookhouse quiet, lute across his knees, the fire burning low. Vola came and sat beside him on the bench, close enough that he could feel her warmth, and she put her arm around him, and he leaned into her with the ease of a man who has learned not to hold himself at a careful distance from the things he wants. "Where do we go?" he asked. "When the season closes?" "South, I think," she said. "There is a winter market circuit through the valley settlements that would suit your work, and I can pick up trail warden contracts along the road." "You have looked into this," he said. "I have looked into this," she agreed. "Practical," he said. "Always," she said. He picked out a few quiet notes on the lute, not a piece, just the feeling of the night and the fire and the mountain around them, the close of a year that had contained more than he had thought he was allowed. "Can I tell you something?" he said. "Yes," she said. "I slept through the first offering," he said, "and the second. I was asleep for both of them and you left them anyway." "I did," she said. "What made you so certain?" Vola was quiet for a moment, her arms solid and warm around him, her cheek against the top of his head. "I was not certain," she said. "I was willing. Those are different things. I was willing to leave the offering whether you received it or not, because the offering was true regardless. I was willing to come back and try again because I had decided that you were worth trying for. And I was willing to be told no and to go because I am not someone who wants something that is not freely given." "But you did not expect to be told no," he said. She thought about this. "No," she said. "I did not expect to be told no. I have a good eye for people and I had looked at you and I knew what I saw." "What did you see?" "Someone who was ready," she said. "Someone who had been ready for a long time, who was simply waiting for something that was real." Thomas sat with that for a moment, in the way he sat with things that were true and needed space. "You were right," he said. "I know," she said without arrogance, just the simple, clean honesty of a woman who trusted her own perception. "I usually am." He laughed, turned his head and kissed her jaw, and she turned and caught his mouth and kissed him properly, slow and warm and entirely without urgency, the kiss of two people who know they have time. When they pulled back, the fire had burned down to deep coals and the cookhouse was warm and quiet, and the mountain night was cold and enormous outside the windows. And they sat together with his lute between them and her arm around him, and the particular uncroated fullness of a life that had come to contain someone else. And both of them were entirely present in it, without looking ahead or behind, just in the exact moment they were in. Thomas picked out the final phrase of the map of roads piece on the lute, the arrival, the warmth that is real, quiet and certain. Vola listened. Outside, the mountain wind moved through the black pines, and the stars came out over Iron Peak in their thousands, and the year turned toward its close. And in the cookhouse of a logging camp in the mountains, a wandering musician and the woman who had come up the road to find him sat together in the firelight and were, with complete simplicity, not alone anymore.